The First Great Awakening took place throughout the 1730s and 1740s and brought three new religious themes to America. First, that predestination was not absolute, so people could repent for their sins and still go to heaven. Second, Christians were to trust their own experiences over the authorities' experiences. Lastly, everyone was equal before God. Reverend Jonathan Edwards ignited the rise of religious activity in this era by explaining, through his Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God sermon, that individuals had the choice to be good or evil. By choosing to be good, God would save them, and by choosing to be evil, God would let them burn in hell. The Great Awakening broke down many sectional boundaries among neighboring groups, which led to spiritual unity, causing an increase in American pride as well as an increase in distrust of British authority. This caused the Americans to close ties with Britain, which led to the American Revolution. The American victory allowed them to establish a form of government with their own pieces of legislature that caused many changes in the United States. In the late 18th century, the economy boomed due to industrialization in America. This led to the scientific revolution involving Enlightenment thought inspired by Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire. Public virtue and public knowledge were stressed, causing great interest in new inventions and scientific learning. As a result, deism, or the belief of the existence of God due to evidence of nature and reason, rose throughout the colonies. The rise of Enlightenment thought led to the Second Great Awakening and to a transition of a hierarchical society in which people ranked one above another towards a republican society in which the citizens had the power to vote for officers and representatives. Lyman Beecher, Peter Cartwright, and Charles G. Finney led this movement, which focused on revivalism, where everyone could be saved by righting their past wrongs. The idea of millennialism, or the belief in the coming of Christ, also formed during this era. Transcendentalism, which illustrated Enlightenment thought, began in the 1830s and called for individualism, self-reliance, and self-discipline. These ideas led to the formation of utopian movements such as Nathaniel Hawthorne's Brook Farm and Robert Owen's New Harmony. The Second Great Awakening also led to a push for better treatments of the mentally deranged, higher education, abolition, prohibition, and women's equality. Penal and asylum reform took place in the 1820s when Dorothea Dix found the cruelties within asylums while traveling for 8 years in America. She illustrated the cruelties that took place in the asylums with a petition that she sent to the Massachusetts legislature, which led to better conditions and better treatments of the mentally ill, as well as a rise in education. Seeing the problems within learning facilities, Horace Mann led an educational reform in which he campaigned for a larger curriculum and higher paid teachers. Due to his achievements, Mann is considered the father of American education. Noah Webster provided textbooks to the new curriculum. He also created the Webster Dictionary that was established in 1828, which helped standardize the American language. Slavery greatly increased throughout the mid-1800s, causing many tensions. To help end slavery, the American Colonialization Society was founded in 1817, which established the Republic of Liberia in 1822 for former slaves. This was the earliest abolitionist effort in the U.S. Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, William Lloyd Garrison's anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator, and Frederick Douglass's autobiography greatly affected the abolitionist cause. They dedicated their works to the ideas of increasing opposition to slavery and ending white supremacy in America. Eventually, in 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed, abolishing slavery in the U.S. The 14th Amendment, in 1868, required for equal protection of all persons under the law, and the 15th Amendment of 1870 protected voting rights of African Americans. Other black civil rights movements took place in the future through the works of Martin Luther King, Jr. and Rosa Parks. Industrialization increased in America. There was a need for distractions and relaxation, such as bars and saloons, causing alcoholic beverages to become very popular. Neal Dow was the father of Prohibition, who studied the effects of alcohol, finding that it caused an increase in violence, crime, and poverty within families. Dow pushed for the Maine Law, which would ban the sale of alcohol in Maine. It was passed in 1851, and by 1855, 13 more states created similar laws. In 1869, the National Prohibition Party was established, and in 1874, the Women's Christian Temperance Union was organized. Their push for prohibition in America soon led to the 18th Amendment in 1919, which temporarily banned alcohol. In the beginnings of the 19th century, women were not given the same rights as men. The Republican motherhood, which represented stereotypical gender roles, shifted into the cult of domesticity, where women were to serve as moral role models and educate their husbands and children. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were two prominent women that helped lead the suffragist movement. In 1848, women gathered in New York, establishing the Seneca Falls Convention, where Stanton read a Declaration of Sentiments declaring that all men and women were created equal. Although years had passed, eventually, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving all women the right to vote. Women also participated in various marches that led Congress to pass Title IX in 1972, prohibiting sex discrimination in educational programs and activities. Women are still fighting for specific rights today, but they have made a tremendous stride since the beginning of the 19th century. Another area of reform was the populist movement of the 1890s. During this time, economic conditions were poor, with the Depression lasting from 1893 to 1897. One group of reformers was known as the People's Party, consisting mostly of farmers. Their goals were to nationalize the railroad, telephone, and telegraph, make a graduated income tax, and get the free coinage of silver, which would cause inflation, making it easier to pay off debts. William Jennings Bryan was the most prominent leader of this reform movement, who electrified the populace with their famous Cross of Gold speech. The Populist Party, however, did not reach any of their goals. The Progressive Era was the government's response to the Gilded Age, which was the time where greed was everywhere, government corruption was often, and crown lords like Boss Tweed ran the cities. To cure the ills of society, the muckraker movement was born. Jacob Riis, with his book How the Other Half Lives, described the horrible conditions in American cities which led to the building codes and city sewage systems. Ida Tarbell focused on reforming the monopolies with her expose on the Standard Oil Company. Her actions would lead to the Clayton Antitrust Act and the Federal Reserve Act. Lincoln Stevens saw the corrupt ties between the big businesses and government, and with his book The Shame of the Cities, he helped pass the 17th Amendment by favoring the initiative, referendum, and recall of voting for state legislatures. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle focused on getting more consumer rights, which Americans eventually got with the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois pushed for minority rights through anti-lynching movements and through the NAACP. Presidential figures also pushed for progressive reforms. Theodore Roosevelt was known for trespassing, regulating railroads with the 1903 Elkins Act and the 1906 Hepburn Act, and his 3 C's: control of corporations, consumer protection, and conservation of natural resources. In addition, Woodrow Wilson continued progressive reforms by taking more government control of industry with acts like the Federal Reserve System, Federal Trade Commission, and the Clayton Antitrust Act. The 1930s New Deal reform movement were set up in response to the Great Depression. The stock market crash in 1929, overproduction of goods, and weak banking institutions caused the Depression, which led to unemployment and poverty. As a result, Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued his New Deal program with goals of lowering the unemployment rate, boosting the economy back to normal, and fixing things like the banking system. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation granted emergency loans to banks, life insurance companies, and railroads, and the National Industry Recovery Act established fair competition codes. The Civilian Conservation Corps and Works Progress Administration employed many through various projects, and the Tennessee Valley Authority created independent public corporation to construct dams and power projects. In 1933, the Agricultural Adjustment Act gave direct payments to farmers to reduce production. Also, the Social Security Act established unemployment compensation and old age insurance. The National Labor Relations Act created the National Labor Relations Board, which prevented unfair labor practices. The Fair Labor Standards Act was created in 1937 and established minimum wage of 40 cents an hour, along with a 40-hour work week. FDR's New Deal reforms created several agencies that continue to help American citizens today. The administration of Lyndon B. Johnson brought about the Great Society reform movement with a goal to end poverty and racial injustice. Medicare and Medicaid were established, providing federal funding for older Americans. He also created the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Transportation. In addition, Johnson's administration fought to end racial injustice with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed racial discrimination in workplaces and schools. Also, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 made voter registration a national affair, making it much easier for African Americans to register as voters without being discriminated against in their state. Reforms have taken place all throughout our history, and they continue to take place to this day. Reforms of the early 19th century have helped shape and form the country that we live in today.